A celebration in Cana. The village of Cana in Galilee was alive with excitement. The warm afternoon sun bathed the rolling hills and vineyards in golden light, casting long shadows as the day faded into evening. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat, freshly baked bread, and the sweet aroma of figs and honey. It was a day of joy. A wedding feast was being held, and the entire village had gathered to celebrate. The courtyard of the bridegroom's home was adorned with colorful fabrics and glowing lanterns. Tables overflowed with platters of food, bowls of olives, and baskets of ripe fruit. Goblets of wine clinked together as guests raised their glasses in laughter and song, blessing the newlyweds. Among those present was Mary, the mother of Jesus. She had arrived earlier, offering her help to the hosts in preparing for the feast. She moved through the gathering with a quiet grace, watching the joyful faces around her. Nearby, Jesus sat with his disciples, Peter, Andrew, John, Philip, and Nathanael, some of whom had only recently begun following him. The evening deepened, and the celebration grew more jubilant. Music filled the air as men and women danced beneath the soft glow of lanterns. Laughter echoed through the stone courtyard, and the flow of wine seemed endless. But beneath the surface of this joyous occasion, a quiet crisis was unfolding, one that no one had yet noticed. The wine runs out. As the evening wore on, the music and laughter continued, but behind the scenes, a quiet crisis was unfolding. The master of the feast, the man responsible for ensuring the smooth running of the celebration, noticed something alarming. He hurried toward the groom's father, his expression tense. "The wine is almost gone," he whispered urgently. The groom's father stiffened. "Are you certain?" The steward nodded gravely. "We have emptied the last jar." A wave of unease passed over the older man's face. Running out of wine at a wedding was not just a simple inconvenience, it was a disaster. In Jewish culture, wine was more than just a drink. It was a symbol of joy, blessing, and hospitality. To run out of it during the celebration would be a deep humiliation for the host family. The guests would whisper. The reputation of the newlyweds would suffer. Servants murmured among themselves, their faces pale. What could be done? There was no time to find more. Supplies had already been exhausted. Nearby, Mary had been watching attentively. She had noticed the whispers, the nervous glances between the servants, the growing tension in the air. She understood what was happening. With quiet determination, she turned to her son. Jesus sat watching, his expression calm and knowing. He was not surprised. Mary stepped toward him and in a voice just above a whisper said, "They have no more wine." An unexpected command. Jesus rose from his seat, his gaze sweeping across the courtyard. The joyful laughter and music of the guests continued, oblivious to the quiet crisis unfolding. Nearby, his eyes rested on 6 large stone water jars, each used for the Jewish purification rituals. These jars were massive, capable of holding 20 to 30 gallons each, and at that moment, they stood empty. Turning to the servants, he gave a simple yet puzzling instruction. "Fill the jars with water." The servants hesitated. Water? How could that possibly solve the problem? They exchanged uncertain glances, doubt flickering in their eyes. But Mary's words still lingered in their minds. "Do whatever he tells you." Without further question, they obeyed. Bucket by bucket, they carried cool, fresh water from the well, pouring it carefully into the stone jars. The process was slow, requiring effort and patience. Water splashed over the edges as the jars filled, and soon each one stood brimming to the top. Jesus watched them in silence, then, with quiet authority, gave his next instruction. "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." The servants froze. Take water to the banquet master? Would they be laughed at, or worse, scolded, for offering him mere water when he expected wine? But something in Jesus' voice left no room for doubt. One of the servants hesitantly dipped a ladle into one of the jars. He stared at the liquid inside, then, with a deep breath, carried the goblet carefully across the courtyard toward the master of the feast. The master's astonishment! The master of the feast was a man of refined taste, well versed in the quality of fine wine. He had spent years overseeing celebrations, ensuring that every guest was served the best. As the servant approached him, offering a freshly filled goblet, the steward took it without much thought. He lifted the cup to his lips and took a sip. Then he paused, his brows furrowed in surprise. He swirled the liquid in the cup, examining its deep, rich color. Taking another sip, he let the wine roll over his tongue, savoring its taste. This was no ordinary wine. The aroma was bold, the flavor smooth and perfectly aged, the finest wine he had ever tasted. He turned quickly toward the bridegroom, his voice filled with both amazement and admiration. "Everyone serves the best wine first," he declared loudly, "and only after the guests have had their fill do they bring out the cheaper wine. But you have saved the best wine until now." Gasps of delight rippled through the crowd. The guests cheered, raising their goblets in celebration, laughing at the unexpected generosity of the host. The wine flowed freely once more, and the joy of the feast was restored. Yet in the shadows, the servants stood frozen in awe. They had poured water. But what had been drawn was wine. And not just any wine, the finest they had ever encountered. A miracle had taken place before their very eyes. The disciples witnessed his glory. At the far end of the courtyard, Jesus' disciples had seen everything. They had watched as the servants filled the jars with water. They had observed the hesitation on the steward's face before taking that first sip. They had heard his astonished declaration. The best wine had been saved for last. Peter glanced at Andrew. Andrew looked at Philip. None of them spoke, but the weight of the moment pressed upon their hearts. This was no mere coincidence. This was no ordinary man. Jesus had performed a miracle, not with grand spectacle or a public declaration, but with quiet authority, seen only by those willing to truly perceive. Nathanael, the one who had once scoffed, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" now stood in silent awe. His doubts had vanished. Jesus had not recognition. He had not called attention to himself. Yet to those who had eyes to see, the truth was undeniable. This was the Messiah, and at that moment, they believed in him. The beginning of a new era. This was Jesus' first miracle, not in a grand temple, not before kings or religious leaders, but at a simple village wedding among ordinary people. He had taken something common and made it extraordinary. He had taken emptiness and filled it with abundance. Where joy had begun to fade, he restored it. Where shame threatened, he covered it with honor. Where there was lack, he brought overflowing provision. But this was more than just a miracle about wine. It was a sign that the old was passing away and something new had begun. A sign that wherever Jesus was, the ordinary became extraordinary. A sign that his power was not just for the wealthy, the powerful, or the learned, but for the humble, the unnoticed, and the forgotten. His first miracle had been performed, and the world would never be the same again. Final reflection. The miracle at Cana was more than just turning water into wine. It was a glimpse into what Jesus had come to do. Just as he transformed water into the finest wine, he would transform sinners into saints. Just as he filled empty jars, he would fill empty hearts with purpose and grace. And just as the best wine was saved for last, so too would his greatest gift, eternal salvation, be revealed in the fullness of time. His hour had not yet come, but this moment was the first unveiling of his glory. For those who witnessed it, their faith was ignited. For those who followed him, this was only the beginning.